And welcome back to the Talking Archive. My name is Josh Jacobs, and our guest is Dave Berg, longtime producer of The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. Now, when we left off last time, he discussed how he got the job all of a sudden. And Dave, how long was the process from the time that you got the job till the time that the show actually went on the air with new host Jay Leno?
They were like 3 months out at that point. So it was in another. This must have been like in March or April, early April, and then the show went on the air May 28th, 1992.
Oh, okay. I remember Billy Crystal was the first guest of Jay's, and but I remember the first thing, the impression I got from the show.
He was indeed, and the last guest.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that. I met Billy Crystal a couple times. One time at the Clippers game, my dad knew John Herrera, who was Al Davis's publicist and kind of right-hand guy for the Raiders, and sometimes he'd give us Al Davis's front row seats at the Clippers games. And, of course, Billy Crystal is probably the most famous Clipper fan out there, which was kind of surprising since he's from New York. But hey,
maybe the only celebrity Clipper fan.
Yeah. And he's from New York, which was kind of the most amazing thing to me. Is like, wow, a New Yorker, a Clipper fan. Although they were in Buffalo originally, but not New York City. So I shook Billy's hand. I was about 20 years old, and I just said, hey, I want to shake your hand, say I like your work. He said, thank you. So I just walked away. I didn't want to say anything else because the game was about to start. And then at the Emmy Awards, he came up to me. I was an usher there at the Pasadena Civic Auditorium at the time. He's like, oh, by the way, where's the liquor?
Funny man.
It was.
Really decent man. Really good man.
Yeah, he and his wife, Jan, have been married for like 53 years. She was his first girlfriend ever, and they've been married for over 50 years now.
It's a really decent guy, and as I said on the first show, Jay said, I'd like you to be the last guest on my show, and he was. 22 years later, he was also the last guest.
Wow.
And he came to the after party.
That's one thing I regret. I never did attend a taping of The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. I wished I had. My schedule was such, I just didn't set aside the time to do it. But I remember the first set they had was pretty much Johnny's set without the rainbow curtains and with new decorations. But then I remember Jay did a series of episodes in New York City back in 1994 and had this really cool-looking nightclub set, and a couple months later, they brought that set to Burbank, and that was pretty much the turnaround for the show. I mean, I'm sure I know there are other things behind the scenes, but that new nightclub set really set the tone for making Jay number one after Letterman went to CBS. What was it? I guess how difficult was it for you personally when Letterman went to CBS and started crushing Leno in the ratings initially?
Well, there's two different things there. I'm gonna take the first thing before we get to Letterman because it's kind of an interesting story, and that was when we went to New York, and we were in the Saturday Night Live set, and Jay saw how colorful it was and how neat it was, and what had happened is, the set that we started out with when we first did the show, which very much resembled the Johnny Carson show, even though our goal was not to resemble the Johnny Carson show in every way. Other than the colored curtains, the multicolored curtains, we pretty much did the Johnny Carson show. Well, what was going on there is that we were also in the old Johnny Carson studio. And Johnny wasn't there, don't get me wrong, and I don't think Johnny's ghost was there, because Johnny was still alive. But there was no presence of Johnny, but there was a presence. We could all feel Johnny Carson, including Jay. We could all feel it. We're using his old studio where the audience was way set back from where Jay stood to do his monologue. And it just, we all felt that presence. And at a certain point, and I do think it did make a difference when we went to New York and went in a different studio, the Saturday Night Live studio, and came back. We built out Studio 3 while we were gone that week.
Mm-hmm.
We built a new studio right across the hallway from Studio 1, which was Johnny Carson, and it was a mirror image of Studio 1. It was just like Studio 1.
Wow.
But it was just across the hallway. It was a different studio, and we built it to Jay's taste, not ours, Jay's taste, and the show took on a different tone, and we didn't feel that overwhelming pressure like we can never measure up to Johnny Carson. It made a huge difference, just being in a different studio.
Wow. I really liked the new set that they had because it had kind of that nightclub feel as well. And like you said, the audience was right there where he was able to give them high fives and shake hands and just kind of like that personal touch, if you will.
Right. Yeah. Yep. It was, it made a huge difference. It did.
And then, but before that, Letterman had went to CBS and did the Late Show, and initially the Late Show beat Leno in the ratings. How much stress were you feeling personally, and pressure now that Letterman was the new king of late night, if you will?
Well, it was enormous pressure because not only did we were we getting beat by David Letterman. We also had the press against us because the press was reported. The press was anti Tonight Show from the very beginning because it was their perception that Johnny Carson preferred David Letterman, and I guess that is true. I mean, Johnny. I think Johnny said that he would have selected Letterman.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were dealing with that, and Letterman felt that he was entitled to that show. He felt that he didn't even have to ask for it, that that was his birthright to have that show. And so that's what we were dealing with. And then on top of it, Letterman starts getting better ratings. So what happened is how did we turn it around? There were a couple of things. The first thing was the O.J. Simpson trial. Jay made a decision from the word go that the O.J. Simpson trial was nothing but a farce. It was a circus, and that's how he started doing his jokes. He sort of got really edgy with his jokes, and he came up with the concept of the judge for the O.J. Simpson trial was Judge Ito.
That's right, yeah.
And so he came up with the concept of having these dancers come out, and we called them the Dancing Ito. And they were...
I remember that.
They were dressed up like Ito. We brought in a choreographer, and it became really incredible. It was so incredible that Judge Ito himself was a big fan.
Wow.
And he called up Jay and said, "Hey, would you mind? The jury is working really hard. Could you come down and come and entertain the jurors?"
Wow.
Even Ito himself was a big fan. And then we had another development, and I'm trying. I don't know why this name is slipping my mind, but the great Hugh Grant.
That's right. Yeah.
We had an incident. We had booked Hugh Grant to do his first American-made film. His first American film. And after we booked him, he got into an incident where he was caught with a hooker in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
And this was huge news. This was like worldwide news. Huge. And he did the first thing that celebrities always used to do back then when they made a mistake, he disappeared. He disappeared. His people called and said, we're canceling Hugh's appearance on the Tonight Show. And so Jay made a decision, no, we can't let that happen. We have to do whatever it takes to keep Hugh on the show. We have to. And so now I didn't book Hugh Grant for this, so I'm not the one that did it. But the producer kept calling Hugh's people and saying, you know, it would really help Hugh. Really, it would help him to come on and just own up to what he did, and then we can talk about the movie. And in those days, you know, coming on and doing a mea culpa was unheard of. You just disappeared. There was that whole concept didn't exist back then. Well, this approach wasn't getting anywhere, right? So Jay said, I'm going to call, and give me a number to call so I can talk to Hugh directly. Well, Hugh's people hedged, but we just kept calling and calling. Jay really wants to talk to Hugh, and finally we got Hugh Grant on the phone. And Jay said, Hugh, I'm telling you, you should come on the show. It'll help you. It'll help your career, because where's your career going now? It's going nowhere. You come on the show, you do a little mea culpa. I ask you one question. I ask you one question and one follow-up question, and then we'll go on and talk about your movie. And he went for it. He actually went for it, which was incredible, because remember, this was like in the days before the internet. This was like an internet story that had just gone wild, out of control. Well, the day of the show, Jay goes, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I promised Hugh Grant I would ask him one question and one follow-up. What do I do? What's the one question that I can ask? And somebody came up with, well, just ask him, Hugh, what were you thinking? And Jay goes, yeah, okay. So when Hugh came out to the desk, Jay said, Hugh, what the hell were you thinking? He added the hell.
Yeah.
Right? Just to put a little funny twist on it. And Hugh Grant came through. He said, you know, I did something very, very wrong. And he actually genuinely apologized. He didn't say, you know, I'm really sorry if I offended anyone.
Yeah.
He just said, you know, when you do something wrong. He said, I could say, you know, when I was a little boy, my mom pushed me down the stairs and I bumped my head. And he said, but that would be bonkers. That would just be wrong. I did something wrong. And our ratings were through the roof. They were like the third highest show we had ever had, highest ratings. We beat Letterman that night by millions and millions of people. And the ratings never went back. We were number one from that point on. That was in 1995.
I remember, in fact, I watched that episode. I remember the first time, and sometimes I'll even, you know, kind of like, you know, I love to impersonate Jay Leno, and that line just comes right, you know, to the forefront of my mind when I think of Leno-isms, if you will. You know, just, and I remember going back to the Itos for just a second. I remember they also had a Marcia Clark lookalike there as well. That sometimes participated with
the dancing Marcia Clark. Yeah, we did, and then we had the dancing Rodmans.
Oh, that's right. I remember that.
They just made a whole big thing out of it, and really the ratings were already turning around. We were almost right up to Letterman's ratings, but then the Hugh Grant appearance put us over the top.
I remember it was around that time, I forget if it was before or after the Hugh Grant appearance, where Dennis Rodman was on there, and Jay Leno asked Rodman about his wife, and he couldn't remember his then wife, Carmen Electra's name. He was like, well, my wife, you don't even know her name? I mean, It was just, I was like busting of laughing watching this. He couldn't remember his wife's name.
Or he didn't want to mention her. I worked with Rodman. I'm the one that got him to do the show and to become a regular guest because he was, believe it or not, ratings gold well beyond his basketball days.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I remember him just being the most outlandish person in basketball, but he drew ratings to the game. I mean, granted, Jordan and before that, Kareem, Magic, Bird did as well, but Rodman kind of had that extra, I guess, cherry on top, if you will.
He certainly did, and which is not to take anything away from Jordan. In fact, I have so much respect for the basketball greats of that era because they knew the Charles Barkleys, the Magic Johnsons, the Shaquille O'Neals, all of those guys. The mailman.
Karl Malone,
Karl Malone. Yeah, on and on and on. They knew they were not only basketball players, but they were there to be entertainers. And the NBA encouraged them to do that. And so they were all incredible guys. And to this day, I believe Charles Barkley is one of the funniest people.
Oh,
he's funnier than many comedians.
He is. I love, the Chuck and Shaq interaction on TNT Sports. In fact, they just signed Barkley to another 10-year, $100 million contract. To me, I think he's getting too little, to tell you the truth, just because he's that good. I just, sometimes on the morning show I produce here in LA, I will, if Chuck says something, interesting, I'll put it up there. Sometimes we get to it, sometimes we don't, but just still, it's just, I mean, like my best friend and I sometimes have these Charles Barkley-isms. What would happen if Charles Barkley was a contestant on The Price is Right, or was having to be on a reality show where he and Bill Laimbeer swap wives, wife swap for a week or whatever. Just crazy stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, but I heard Charles is very approachable. He's a very people person.
And honestly, I'm telling you, he's funnier than most comedians. He has a true comedic sense of timing. And the other thing is, I don't think he puts a lot of thought into it. He's just a natural.
Yeah, definitely. Because I remember, his NBA games, after losses when he'd be cussing, it was entertainment. I mean, it was just, I mean, you hate to see a person lose, but you're kind of laughing because of the things he was saying off the top of his head was just oh my gosh, this is more entertaining than even the game.
And he knew it. I mean, he knew that he saw himself as an entertainer.
In fact, it was interesting. A couple months ago, I interviewed Randy Merkin, who used to be on ESPN 1000 in Chicago. And he actually has Charles's cell phone number, so occasionally he'll call Chuck up and just kind of shoot the breeze, if you will, and had Chuck on many times. So I thought that was pretty cool. Do you have Chuck's number as well?
I did.
Cool.
Yeah, I did. I could call Charles. I out of respect, I didn't call unless I absolutely had to. I went through his people at TNT because they were great folks too. They were wonderful people.
That's great.
So I tried to respect that, but I did have his number.
That's awesome. Yeah. And now, besides those great NBA stars, who are some of the friendliest other people you got to meet as guests during the Tonight Show?
I think I was especially impressed, maybe because of my news background, at being able to access presidential candidates, presidents, ex-presidents, huge political figures, famous commentators, and that impressed me, maybe because of my news background, and to be able to just talk to people one-on-one from that level. And this is, I know this is hard to imagine these days for people, but if you go back in the time machine with me, there was a time where it was considered very unprofessional for a politician, particularly for a senator or a president or a presidential candidate, it was very considered unprofessional to appear on a show like Johnny Carson or a late night show. They just didn't do it. They didn't do it. And if you look at Johnny Carson, he never had, he had Ronald Reagan on, but they were friends. And I believe that was before Ronald was president. And so when I was able to book Barack Obama, just a few weeks into his career as president, as he was the first sitting president ever to do a late night show. So that was kind of cool to me. And
I know that Obama got a lot of criticism on the right saying, what is this guy doing appearing on The Tonight Show? And now Donald Trump did that when he was president on various platforms, if you will. And so Barack Obama got a lot of grief, but now it's just a normal thing.
Right. And I had worked with Donald Trump for many, many years. I also had his direct number.
This is the Talking Archive. My name is Josh Jacobs. Our guest is Dave Berg, longtime producer of The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. And next time, Dave discusses more guests, including what happened when Donald Trump first guested on The Tonight Show, how likable and friendly of a person was he, and how likable and friendly was a person as a successor, current President Joe Biden.